In our house, no one ever spoke loudly. Not because loudness was forbidden, but because it simply didn't belong there. Voices softened on their own, as if the walls themselves absorbed any sharpness and returned only what was calm and measured. Silence in that house was never empty. It felt full of footsteps that creaked just enough to remind you of their presence, full of old conversations that seemed to linger in the corners, full of quiet evenings when even the wind outside moved slowly. Every sound was considered, every movement counted, and yet it was not oppressive. It was peaceful. The house had stood on the same street for more than 40 years. When it was first built, the road was nothing but dirt, and children ran around with bare feet, playing games until the sun disappeared behind the trees. Later, the road was paved. Street lights appeared, new houses were built nearby, and older houses were torn down. Trees were replaced, fences were painted, mailboxes changed colors. The neighborhood shifted and changed, but the house remained the same. It never tried to stand out. It never demanded attention. It simply existed, breathing slowly and quietly, in rhythm with the people who lived inside it. My parents lived there. My grandmother and grandfather lived there. And for many years, so did I. My grandmother always believed that a house lived alongside the people who inhabited it. She treated it as if it were a living creature, with patience, care, and respect. If you take care of a house, she said, it will take care of you. She wiped the windowsills every morning, even when they were already clean. A window is the eyes of a house, she would tell me. And eyes should always see clearly. Every morning began the same way. I woke up not to an alarm clock, but to the smell of tea. Not coffee, not anything sharp or bitter, just tea. Warm, comforting, familiar. My grandmother brewed it in a large teapot, the kind that had been in the house longer than I had. It had survived moves, renovations, even a fire in the neighboring street. There were small cracks along the handle and the lid, and the enamel was worn, but she refused to replace it. Some things stay, she would say, and because they stay, they remember. We always sat at the table together. Always, even if someone was late. No one started eating until everyone arrived. Nobody hurried, nobody checked the time. Food doesn't like haste, my grandfather would say calmly. And neither does life. He rarely spoke, but when he did, his words stayed with you, like a quiet echo that lingered long after it was said. He had a habit of noticing details that no one else did. The way a shadow fell across the floor in the morning, the sound of the wind in the chimney, the faint tremor in a tree branch. He would smile slightly at small things, nod at ordinary moments, and in that silence, everything felt heavier, more meaningful. In the afternoons, he went into the yard. Sometimes he fixed things that were not yet broken. A loose board, a fence post leaning too far, an old bench that had already been repaired many times. Things don't break suddenly, he would say. They ask for attention long before that. And I followed him everywhere. He never asked me to help, but he always let me. He showed me how to hold the hammer, how to measure carefully, how to do something once, but do it properly. Summer afternoons were long and warm. The air smelled of grass and sunlight, mixed with the faint scent of old wood from the house. I would sit on the steps while he worked, watching him hammer, saw, and adjust. He never rushed. He taught me to notice small things, the way ants moved in lines, how leaves drifted in the wind, how shadows stretched and changed with the time of day. Life, he said once, is in the little things, if you pay attention. Evenings were my favorite. We would sit outside on the bench near the gate, drinking tea, watching the world slow down. Neighbors passed by, greeting us softly, exchanging brief words. The sun would sink low, turning the sky orange and pink, the air cooling with gentle breezes. Nights in that neighborhood felt alive, yet peaceful, full of gentle sounds and quiet life. Once, when I was 10, I asked my grandfather a question that had been on my mind for weeks. "Grandpa, are you happy?" He didn't answer right away. He looked up at the sky, tracing the movement of clouds, the slow descent of the sun. After a long pause, he said, "I'm calm, and sometimes that matters more." At the time, I didn't understand what he meant. Years later, I would. There was a room in the house that almost no one entered. Not because it was forbidden or locked. It was just respected. A small room with a narrow window and an old writing desk. I always thought it was simply storage for things that no longer had a place. One rainy afternoon, when the house was unusually quiet, I went inside. In the wardrobe, I noticed a cardboard box. Simple, neat, carefully labeled in my grandfather's handwriting. Letters. Inside were stacks of envelopes, tied with thin string, arranged with surprising order. Some were yellowed with age. Others looked almost new. I picked one up and noticed the careful, confident handwriting of the address. At that moment, my grandmother appeared in the doorway. She didn't scold me. She didn't look surprised. She just said softly, "So the time has come." She told me that my grandfather had been writing letters his entire life. To family, to friends, to people he never met. Even when he lived in the same house with her, he wrote letters to capture thoughts that couldn't be spoken. Not all feelings like to be spoken, she explained. Some letters were meant for her but were never given. Some were to friends long gone. Some were written to himself. It was the first time I realized that adults, too, doubt, hesitate, and sometimes communicate with themselves instead of others. That summer, my grandfather changed slowly. Not in ways I could point to at first, but in small details. He still worked in the yard, still walked around the house, still made tea. But everything was slower, deliberate, as if he were listening to time itself. One evening he handed me an envelope. "Open it when you grow up," he said. I wanted to ask why, but I didn't. It seemed more important to wait. He spoke to me often that summer, more than he had ever spoken before. About choices, about responsibility, about how sometimes the right decision doesn't bring immediate happiness. But if you make it honestly, he said, you'll be able to live with it. Autumn came quietly. He passed away as gently as he had lived, leaving the house and the yard unchanged, but somehow quieter. Years passed. I moved away, built my life, started a family. I visited less often than I wanted. The house remained. When my grandmother passed, I returned alone. The familiar creak of the floor greeted me. The smell of tea and old wood enveloped me. The house was empty but not cold, as if it waited for me to arrive. I found the box of letters again, and the envelope my grandfather had given me. The letter was short, but precise. If you are reading this, it means you already know that life does not hurry, and that is normal. The most important thing is not to rush to become someone else. Be yourself. That is enough. I sat for a long time, listening to the house breathe. Now I have children of my own. Sometimes they ask why I don't throw away old things, why I repair instead of replace, why I keep boxes that seem unnecessary. I smile and tell them, because things remember. I write letters sometimes too. I don't always send them, but I keep them. Because one day someone may open a box, read a few lines and understand something important. That they were loved, that they were waited for, that the little things, the quiet moments, the ordinary days were all meaningful. Even the smallest moments, the tiniest acts, are remembered. The smell of tea in the morning, the way a window frame glows in the sunlight, a step on the stairs, the creak of the gate. These details carry more than memory. They carry love. And that is what the house always taught me. Over the years I returned often, each time noticing more. The way a shadow stretched across the floor in the morning, the faint hum of the wind through the chimney, the smell of fresh bread baking in the oven. Every corner, every object, every creak held a story. I began to write down small notes, little observations, little memories, just to preserve them. And sometimes I shared them with my children. I told them stories of summer afternoons spent under the old apple tree, of the time I tried to repair a chair and ended up breaking it completely, and of the letters my grandfather had written but never sent. They laughed at some things, frowned at others, but always listened. And in that listening, I saw the cycle continue. The house, the family, the memory and love, all intertwined. Even when I walk through the neighborhood, past new houses and new trees, past roads I barely recognize, I feel the old house inside me. I carry its rhythm in my breathing, its patience in my thoughts, its calmness in my heart. And every evening, when I sit down with my children, or when I write a letter, or when I pause to listen to the wind, I feel the house alive again. It waits, quietly, patiently, for the next person who will notice, who will remember, who will care. And that is how love lasts. Quietly, steadily, in every detail, in every small moment, in every heartbeat that passes through a house and through a life.